There's no question that family meetings are necessary with multi-generational wealth. The reason plans fail isn't because they weren't executed well. It's because they weren't maintained and optimized, and people were not prepared to play the role that they're going to play when they step into the shoes of the wealth creators or the generation before them.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Connected Advisor. I'm your host, Kyle Van Pelt, co-founder and CEO of Milemarker. And today I am joined by Rick Simonetti. Rick is the CEO and head of wealth planning at Fidelis Capital Partners, and he is the proud father of triplets, which I have twins. It's not just like one more. Rick went exponential on me here. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Rick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I think your triplets are grown. So I have hope that I'm going to make it through and I'm going to survive, because you seem like you still have your sanity. You seem like you're in a good place, even with having triplets.
Well, I appreciate your differentiating survival with sanity. Survival is likely, sanity questionable. So
I love it.
No, it's been something. They're 17-year-old boys, and I would say this: I wouldn't trade it for anything. I also wouldn't wish it on anybody. As you know, one child is life-changing and really hard. I don't mean to slight anybody who had a singleton, because it's incredibly difficult either way.
Oh, yeah.
3 is a different ballgame. But and I would say that while you say Rick has triplets, most importantly, Sherry, my wife, has triplets. She even homeschooled them for a good portion of their. So it's miraculous. She's amazing.
Amen. That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. By the way, I tell a lot of people, we have 4 kids total, and I tell everybody, going from 0 to 1 was the hardest, unquestionable. So anybody who went from 0 to 1 has experienced the craziness of parenting. So I echo what you were saying.
Yeah.
So Rick, I ask everybody the same first question. I've had hundreds of conversations like this one, on the air, off the air. But what I've found is everybody has their own unique path to our industry. It's not really the type of industry like management consulting or investment banking or something that people just sort of end up in. And maybe some people follow a traditional path like family footsteps or something like that. Other people don't even know this industry exists. They go along doing something different and they come in our industry through the side door. But what I've found is whether your path is traditional or untraditional, everybody has something that I refer to as a money moment. And that money moment is the moment in your life where the light bulb went off and you said, this is what I want to do for my career. So Rick, what was that money moment in your life that led you to be sitting in the chair you're in right now having this conversation?
It is a great question. And I would say my path has been more untraditional than traditional, but I probably had 2 or 3 money moments, if you will, in the span of my career, which I'll even go back into the fact that when I went into college, I went in computer engineering, which so did everybody the year I went into computer engineering. So about midway through, my brother Steve, my older brother Steve said, I was getting frustrated with getting closed out of classes and so many people were interested in it. He said, why don't you try accounting? I know that most people don't find that to be incredibly exciting, but I did. I tried accounting and it worked out well. And I graduated in accounting and I went to become a CPA. And my entire career in accounting was focused on tax. And I was at Deloitte. It was Haskins and Sells back then. Deloitte, Haskins and Sells. It's Deloitte now. But my entire career there was tax, and my entire career there was serving closely held businesses and the families that own them. And there was a point in that where I was like, well, it's really not as much fun to look in the rearview mirror and report on what happened last year as just thinking about what we could do next year and beyond, right? To kind of save on taxes and preserve wealth for multiple generations. And so I pivoted to that at Deloitte, and then ultimately had this opportunity presented to me to join the planning team of what was First Union, which became Wachovia, which became Wells Fargo, back in 1999. And I joined the planning team here in Florida. And that was all I got the opportunity to do, was meet with very successful, wealthy families and help them think through the breadth of their financial situation. That's what kind of my pivot moment was, away from tax prep to planning, and then out of the CPA world and into the wealth management space. And I was there 22 years in total, and had the privilege of ultimately contributing to the creation of the wealth planning design there, We won best wealth planning and private banking in North America one year when I was at the helm, which was incredibly humbling and rewarding. The other money moment was realizing the industry was shifting and making this pivot back to or into independence.
Yeah.
Which is where I sit today. So that might have been a longer answer than you wanted, but
no such thing. No such thing when it comes to people's story. And I love that you shared that. So I actually want to double click on something there at the risk of going maybe a little bit too far off the beaten path. But
sure.
There's a discussion that I think has been happening, broader around the space. And bear with me as I wander through this. But there's been this discussion about fees in our space for a long time. And there's kind of this whole, should our business look more like a CPA accounting practice or like a lawyer practice or things like that? But then at the same token, I feel like the CPAs and the lawyers go, man, I wish I could run a business the way that wealth planners run their business, right? And so you've had the distinct privilege of sitting on both sides of those. And I'd like it maybe if you could just sort of speak to, open-ended question, but speak to the differences and maybe why a CPA practice looks the way that it does and why a wealth practice looks the way that it does, and why the business models make sense.
Yeah, happy to. And the business models have pros and cons, right? That's why they still exist. So when I was in the CPA world, we charged by the hour. And you charge by the hour more for somebody who's been there a long time than you do for somebody who's new in the business. And so you use leverage and kind of get newer people in the business to do as much of the groundwork as possible so that the person at the higher billing rate can step in and review it and then ultimately help to present it to clients. And it was a great learning ground for me. I don't begrudge a moment that I spent at Deloitte. It was awesome. It was also incredibly hard work. And busy season was truly busy season, pulling all-nighters and going home and showering and coming back to finalize a tax return and deliver it to someone. That became a little intense, but the world has changed now. I'm not saying it's like that now, but in terms of the business model, charging by the hour does have a major flaw. And that is, in my experience, clients tend not to ask as many questions as they would if they realized they had kind of an unfettered access to the advisor with whom they're working or the team with whom they're working. There are a number of law firms we work with today that charge fixed fees on project fees, which helps overcome that situation. That said, the business model at the law firm still measures people by the hours they work and the dollars produced. So in that transition to the wealth management space, the idea is that can you create a structure where the fees charged for traditional asset management will also cover the costs of delivering kind of unfettered access to an advisory team that's partnering with that investment team to make sure that it all is seamless. And that has proven a very powerful delivery, right? For clients to be able to say, hey, I've got another question. Or in our case, when we're working with multiple generations, my children have a question, right? They're getting married and they're thinking about this. They're having their first child and they're thinking about this. They're buying a home. What's the best way to do that? So two business models, very different, but the end goal is the same. Everybody in both of those business models want to provide great advice and great service. The business models just have this kind of push and pull. Hourly tend not to engage as much to fully understand what the client's doing. The other thing is that's a very discrete end time. So project ends. I've executed the document I'm working on with that attorney. It's 2 years later. Am I maintaining it and optimizing it well? Which again is where the integration of planning and understanding into the wealth management practice is critical.
Man, that's so well laid out. And I appreciate you kind of sharing that. I don't know if I've heard anybody articulate the concept or the thought of, as advisors or as wealth planners, you want people asking questions. You want them to bring the next generation. You want it to be sort of an all-encompassing thing where perhaps maybe the tax planning or the attorney aspect is, it's a narrow focus for a point in time of something that you need rather than a bigger, broader conversation. And so I think that's a really good framing for how things work the way that they do. And I know that you know them both intimately, which is cool.
And I would add one other thing, that when the two of those business models work together, you've got an incredibly competent tax advisor, an incredibly competent trust and estate attorney, and a wealth management team that integrates kind of the talent, education, experience necessary to understand what it is they're doing, and then carry that forward with the family. That's where you have great success. And so I We work incredibly well with very strong, competent law firms. Right? And we actually save them a little bit of time, right? We help their business be successful as it's measured because oftentimes we're taking the time to explain the nuances, do some of the mathematical calculations that illustrate it's effective or not, that helps the family be able to take action. So
I love that. And that's a perfect segue to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, okay, I talked to lots of leaders at firms and I feel like they're in this balance of, do we need to bring everything in-house, right? Do I need to have a team of tax experts, a team of estate planning experts, a team of all of these people? The advisor is kind of the quarterback of the relationship, but they're throwing the ball to the people inside here, but we're a one-stop shop. Versus, do we partner with extremely competent people who have their own separate businesses and we sort of create this ecosystem? I think you've been on both sides, but you started to talk about it there. And I think my question for you is, for the people listening to this, running wealth management firms, how do they have great relationships with these kind of satellite service providers like a CPA and like an estate planning attorney so that it's not contentious, but that it actually feels symbiotic and that everybody is really helping provide the best service for the client?
it's a great question. And I have encountered, and I'm sure others have, scenarios where it doesn't get off on the best foot, right? Because somebody is raising a question that may, in fact, appear to be something that would counter, right? Why are you doing this way, right? Or something like that. So I've seen them get off on the wrong foot, but I think a little bit of context would help. The families that we serve, like literally almost all of them are in the highest tax bracket. They're all, right, incredibly successful. Most of them are, it's almost all multi-generational wealth. And as a result of that, there are multiple entities and structures in place. So I would say not having someone in-house that can understand that probably puts the provider at risk, right? From doing something that creates a problem in the context of that organizational structure.
Yeah.
So there's some of this that's just a necessary for service and execution. And then there's the stuff that gets you to that next level, which is being really proactive and thinking ahead. So kind of backing up to the take it in-house or not, in our space, we have to have expertise in that space of understanding that complexity. And it doesn't need to be an expert, but at least it needs to be somebody, okay, wait a minute. Like, it's the person who can recognize that doing something would be an issue so that they can, in fact, connect with the CPA or tax preparer and the attorney and say, hey, are we doing this right? Is there an issue or a question? Or is there another way we should be doing this? So there's an awareness factor that's there as well as just having that enough to know you have to ask a question. And then, thinking back to the breadth of your question, we've built our firm to bring that, a good portion of that in-house. So we've got a couple of former practicing tax and estate attorneys. We've got 2 20-year plus trust officers. And that combination is incredibly powerful as well. You can design a trust, but if you have to administer it,
oh yeah,
you might take a different approach or a different angle. And so our approach is to bring as much of it in-house as possible, but to very proactively engage with those external advisors to make them know that you've got their interests in mind. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of that, one with an attorney and one with a CPA. So we introduced an attorney to a client. This was just in the last 2 weeks. Client provided information to the attorney, and the attorney had a bunch of questions. And we knew where this client was in terms of their understanding. And so we said, why don't you tell us what questions you have? We'll take the time. And by the way, this attorney worked on a fixed fee basis. So I knew that she was thinking, how much time am I going to need to spend helping them get to this level and answer these questions? So we said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will have that call with them. We'll get these answers. I'll circle back with you before we connect with the client. And those are little half-hour calls, not 3 hours. And so she now knows there's no question. And it's true. We have her best interest. We want her to be excellent, right? And focus and to love the relationship that we're doing. So that's one example where you just engage with them in a way that demonstrates your commitment to helping them succeed. The other example is just with the CPAs with whom we work. The money that we are typically managing for clients or the work that we're doing across the planning spectrum has an impact on the client's income taxes and estate taxes. But let's focus on income taxes for a second. We meet quarterly with the CPAs of our clients to make sure that they know what we've done relative to capital gains, losses, and income that's been generated, because those things have a meaningful impact on the income taxes. And that we know if the accountant knows of anything that has taken place, either within a business or other transaction, that's critical for us to understand. So immediately you begin to build this kind of more collaborative approach, not in any way competitive. And clients recognize that very quickly in working with us. And others who do that. But I don't know if that gets to the point that you've made, but
That's perfect.
you got to support, collaborate, communicate, and, make life easier for the client, make life easier for those external advisors. And that does mean, of course, spending a pretty significant amount of time on every client, which is why we've also limited the number of clients that we serve. You just have to.
Yeah.
In this case, so.
I think that's great. And I think it's actually just a really harmonious answer to the first question too, which is why the wealth management business model is the way that it is and others are, because you have all the incentive in the world to go make those calls with the client, get those answers for the attorney, do everything you're doing because you want to be in that center of the hub of everything for them and have them not be afraid to share any of that info and then tee it up for the expert who is, tracking time, for lack of a better term, on what they're doing. You don't want that person who might be an expert going, how much time is this going to take? Should I really engage in this? But you don't mind. And so I think that's a really, really great answer. I think it's a good example for people listening to this. And that was my intention is, hey, if we maybe aren't at a place where we can bring in all of this expertise in-house, maybe the client has an attorney or a CPA that they love, that they've worked with forever, and we have to partner, but we don't want it to be like we're clashing. Because I've just heard too many of those stories, right? Where it's like, you get too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody wants to be the primary relationship. They want to be the smartest person in the room. And, you want it. But at the end of the day, what matters is serving the client. And so I think your answer was really helpful for that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Shifting a little bit, I find it interesting, the name of your firm. So, Fidelis is the Latin word for faithful. Why is that a virtue that you all wanted to peg to your firm when you were building this business?
We were founded by 5 founding partners that came from two different large private banks. Everybody in our firm has moved out of the private bank world, the large private bank world, into this independent space. And decades ago, we made a promise to clients that we were serving, that we were going to deliver a broad, team-based, collaborative, time-intensive set of services, right? And what was happening in the industry was a combination of cost-cutting and risk management caused larger institutions to kind of restrict the areas in which teams could advise and restrict the resources that were generally available to each client by either eliminating numbers of jobs in certain areas, planning, for example, right? Or otherwise, and saying, look, what we have to do is scale. What we have to do is focus on the next client and be sufficient with our current clients. And that just didn't line up with where we were. And again, I understand that you've got constituents to serve, and when you're serving millions and millions of families, you've got to make sure that you can serve them all well, and that that there's nobody, going rogue, et cetera. So I get that business model. It just didn't line up with the promise we made. And we wanted to be faithful to the promise that we made to the clients that we cared about, the families that we've been serving for decades. And so the 5 of us got together and we started just kind of throwing out things that were important to us: loyalty, legacy, trust, right? And this being faithful to the promise tended to just keep coming up. And so one of our partners, Neil Ellis said, hey, everything sounds better in Latin. So thank goodness for Google or Safari or whichever he used. He goes, what's Latin for? And we came up with Fidelis. We looked at other names, but ultimately we just kept coming back to that. And it's about being faithful to the promise that we made to the clients and families that we serve.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, so speaking of being faithful to the promise that you made to these clients, I think one thing that's really interesting about Fidelis that came up in our research is that, and you mentioned it a little bit in this discussion so far, you all have a team-based approach,
yep.
But you're also very intentional about how that team has, cohesion, succession through a mentorship model. So
that's right.
You are very good at finding people and having them train or apprentice underneath people who are serving the types of clients that you have, which again, you mentioned, there's nothing against mass affluent clients or anything, but if you are a high net worth, ultra high net worth client, there is a different level of expectation on the service and how that needs to be approached and handled. So you're bringing people into the firm and you have this really well-structured mentorship program for how someone can learn how to serve that type of client. Would love to hear you talk about the origin of that and how you've been able to be successful with that.
Got it. The origin stems back to having built out that planning practice. I want to go into the 5 critical things that you need to be really good in this space, right? But part of it is the ability to have some experience in this space so that when a client asks a question, you can both give the answer and the practical answer. And getting that experience is really hard. So even in the large private bank or in any high net worth focused service model, you tend to want to hire somebody who's at that level already before you put them in front of clients. And getting to that level already isn't easy in the industry, especially in the wealth management industry. You almost always start, in a bank branch or as an associate, right?
Yeah.
And you build your book in the hopes that you can, in the weird hopes that you can actually offload some of your clients as you move up market, right? And start serving higher net worth clients, segmenting your book, et cetera. So one of the things that we decided would be important was to develop a bench for that level of planning strategists at the bank. So what we said was we kind of leveraged the CPA law firm model by saying, well, hire some planners, right, who aren't necessarily engaged with clients all the time, but who are learning from the people who are. And we will let them go to meetings. We will let them not only prepare, analyze, research, but sit in the meeting and watch this strategist explain and interact with clients and address not just the technical questions, but the behavioral questions that come in the world of planning. And what that proved out to us is you can, in fact, build this bench strength that can now expand your ability to deliver those services. And it worked beautifully as long as it worked. So we, and then kind of fast forward, one of the foundational elements of our firm, this faithful to the promise piece, was we wanted to be faithful to the promise of serving multiple generations. And one of the challenges you face generally speaking in wealth management is the day your advisor leaves is the day you figure out who your next advisor is. Right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not the day after, it's the week after, or the month after, or however, whenever they get around to we wanted to deliver a different experience to that, especially if we're already working with multiple generations.
Yeah.
So not only is it important to develop the advisor in this fashion, it's also important that the family knows who's next up. So they have confidence that we won't lose the institutional knowledge that we've gained and understanding what role each of them is playing in the family and understanding the dynamics that are at play. So we have been very conscious. We're not a huge firm. We're 21 employees, but a reasonable number of them are in fact in that seat of next up. So right now we focus mostly on the investment space, but I think about, Joe Diffley sitting here in our office who interned with us, then was hired as an advisor, and then was kind of thinking about, do I want to go? We've got kind of two, we'll get there. So go investments or planning, right? You don't have to, but he really was focused on investments. And so we're leading him in the investment space. So then you think about, well, how do you deliver an experience to him, right? And so you got the families to serve. How do you integrate him into meetings? And then how do you deliver the experience to him that actually brings this to life?
It's so thoughtful and intentional. And, I'm thinking about a conversation I had this morning before we got on, where somebody was effectively lamenting to me that in an organization they partner with, it feels like nobody talks to each other, right? They spoke to one person and they laid out everything that they needed, everything they were expecting, went through all the effort to do that. And that person said, okay, I need to get you with an expert on the team and I'll communicate all of this. That expert got on the call and said, what do you need? And it's like, it's such a frustrating experience when you feel like institutional knowledge is not being transferred, that people don't know what's going on. And I can imagine that was with, something not nearly as important as my life savings and the wealth I've created and generated that I'm trying to leave to my family. So I'm sure that for your type of client, there is such a piece that comes with, oh, okay, maybe Rick is going to be moving on and that's his prerogative, right? He doesn't have to be here until, the end with us, but we know that, Joe is going to be our person and he's been in these meetings and we know that he's been paying attention. We know he understands what's going on. And so I think that that's really powerful. And I think that a lot of people could benefit from that type of model.
And it's not easy to do. I mean, you've got to be deliberate about it. And then what you do, by the way, is every moment of that person's advisory life is spent serving families like we serve.
Mm,
It isn't, 1 in 100 that has these issues in my client base. It's every family,
right.
right? And so way better prepares them. And then you think about, and it's not just Joe, it's Libby in Dallas, it's Aaron up in DC. So they've all kind of come on board knowing that they are next up, even if next up is a long way away, and even better if it is.
Yeah.
Like I've got 3 17-year-old kids. I am not going anywhere for a while, right? I got 3 kids to put through college, so I've got a long runway. But no matter how long that is, if you're developing them and they're experiencing something that they just simply couldn't get anywhere else, right? I mean, think about, I'll go back to using Joe as an example. When Joe, we kind of put together a strategy for him. We brought on board the global head of fixed income portfolio management from Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, right? Chris Gunster. Joe meets with them every week just for an hour to chat about fixed income and what's going on. That's not an exposure you'd get right at a firm where that person wouldn't have nearly the time to do that. Well, that's something that's important to Joe. It's important to us. And I would say that combined with the way we integrate planning and investments elevates their game.
That's so cool. I love that. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about this, going a little bit deeper. So, one limitation I would say of larger organizations that work with ultra high net worth clients is that seemingly no matter how complex that family situation is, it tends to be the same few solutions that get recommended to these families, right? So I don't want to necessarily say that everybody's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, or they're trying to mold everybody to fit the kind of scalable box that they've created, but you've been talking about it. I think everybody naturally understands that ultra high net worth probably means more complexity and more personalization to that family. Not all business owners are created equal, right? Their business interests might be different and et cetera. I'm teeing this up, but I think that Fidelis has done a really good job of trying to have a wide range of tools in your tool bag and a wide range of services that you can mix and match for these types of clients. And I wanted to understand where that came from and just talk us through a little bit of why you pride yourself in doing that. Why don't you just, hey, this is what we believe is the best sort of, recipe of services for an ultra high net worth family. We know you're going to be a little bit different, but we're just going to run the play for you. And that's why you hire us.
Yeah. I will tell you, it's a little of both end. So I referenced, we were in institutions where we experienced this narrowing of scope, right? Whether it was resources or you just don't even go there with the client. You can't talk about crypto. You can't talk about, right? Pick the topic. Like there's a risk management approach that just says stay away from that. And so when we, even before we launched, we said there are a few things that we know are going to be important to clients that we have served that we also know have been stripped away as a result of that resource constraint or those risk management decisions. So we went out and found people who are excellent at that. Not that we're going to bring them in-house, but that we trusted, that we knew were going to deliver a great client experience, that we had good communication with. And then to the extent that upon launch, we would say, hey, remember those issues that we couldn't solve for you? We've actually built a structure that could solve for them, not internally, but with this partner and this partner and this partner.
That's cool.
So that was kind of building that. Then we said, but anything else you've got a concern about, ask us, right? Because we can go find somebody, put that on our shoulders. You've got something that's causing you a headache. Let us be the ibuprofen of wealth management. So it's really kind of a both end. Let's build what we think is a good foundation of services. And I'll give you an example that's really important. We've got a number of clients who sold businesses. Their entire career has been in that business, and healthcare was always covered by the business, right?
Yes.
So, and whether they built that business or they're, CEOs of publicly traded companies and they're leaving, like how does healthcare happen? So I'm not a healthcare expert, but we know somebody and we trust somebody and we know they're going to deliver an outstanding experience. So we partner. We bring them in, they consult, they educate, they do exactly what we would want to do with any other topic. And then again, beyond that, you get people who ask about things that are outside the box. And I think that's the reason we have all seen this trend towards independence. Even the large wealth management firms are now saying, we're going to support an independent model. We're going to support RIAs. We're going to build a set of solutions available to them, technology available to them, risk management available to them. They could also choose other. So everybody's going this independent, or not everybody. There's a significant shift towards this independent model. And I think that is, in fact, the reason you get to help a family in a way that doesn't conflict with the service model at some of the kind of more constrained organizations.
I love that. And I do think you're right. I think that's what's led to a lot of the drive towards independence because, going independent is not without its own headaches, right? Some people like to paint the picture like, oh, you're going to unburden yourself from all of this, difficulty and it's going to be great. It's like, pick your problems is what I always like to say.
Yeah, then you've got technology that you manage and HR that you manage and bills that you have to pay and banking, transferring
leases,
all that stuff. Like, it's like you're a business owner. And so one of the bigger challenges to moving to that independent space is how much of your time is going to be taken away from client service.
Yeah.
So we have a chief compliance officer, we have an operations officer, we have a marketing specialist, right? So we actually built that even in our smaller firm to make sure that we dedicated our time to serving families. I'm in multiple client meetings, multiple meetings with people considering Fidelis as their solution every week. I also think that helps me stay connected to what's really going on in the world.
This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
Hey, this is Judd Mackerel. Thanks for listening to this show. I just wanted to ask you one question. What's your technology and data strategy for 2025? If you can't clearly answer that question, I'd love to talk. We are spending some specific time with select firms to really go deep and help you clearly answer that question. We believe that it's one of the things that often holds back firms from really achieving their potential, from really achieving growth, and really getting a lot of the things in the position that they need to be. The things that are holding up the way that you scale, like your workflows, how you manage data around your revenue, how you report all of that to your advisors, and getting clarity in all those things. I'm sure there's a lot of very specific things to your business that are really important as well, and we'd love to talk about that. If this is interesting to you, hit me up with an email. My direct email is jud@milemarker.co, and I'd love to hear from you, hear what you're working on, hear what your strategy is, and see if there's an opportunity for us to help you get more clear on that strategy in 2025. Thanks.
All right, I've got a couple more questions for you before we move into, one of my favorite segments of the show. But you've talked about and hinted at how you sort of have, I don't know if I'd call it a fork in the road, but you've got this planning expertise and this investing expertise, and then you have this team-based approach. So talk to us about how all of that comes together in light of what you were just describing of putting together a solution where it makes sense, right? Because it might be third parties, it might be your investing team, it might be your planning team, and then you've got sort of somebody managing the relationship. But why did you choose to do it like that? And I mean, maybe a pointed question. Are you guys really doing anything that sophisticated on the investment side? Or, is it just something that you wanted to have in-house so that you could craft what you needed to for those client situations?
First of all, if you listen to the words that I have said, or if you look at our website, they all look and sound like that. Like, everybody says we're a team-based model and we have planning and we have this. So there's a couple of elements of that is, do they do it at a level that justifies the messaging or that supports the messaging? And they do it at a level that results in clients saying this is different, right? So starting with that end in mind, more than 30% of our current client base has been introduced since we've launched. And that's because people have joined us and said, you're doing what you said you were going to do. Right? And so you need to meet my brother, my sister, my business partner, my mom. I mean, we've been introduced to all of that, and we've got professionals doing the same. So that has told us that we're actually delivering something meaningful. Now, what does that look like? We actually don't host investment meetings and planning meetings, right, with clients, right? We host portfolio reviews where there's a planner and planning overviews where there's an investment specialist. So everybody gets to see what everybody's doing. This morning, I sat in on an investment review because every time you're doing that, you're watching the client react to what's going on in the portfolio. They might ask income tax questions. They might ask, wait, is that in my trust? And how's that going to play out, right? And so we get to hear those questions. We get to be more responsive and more effective. The investment team is more capable of understanding asset location nuances because they know those pieces and what questions are being asked and the tax ramifications within those asset locations, trust, et cetera. And planning people understand, again, the nuance of what the client is asking and experiencing. In addition to that, we host 2 calls a week with the entire firm. Everybody's on there. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's going on? Right. So we have a dedicated investment committee. They have 2 calls a week. There's 6.5 CFAs. There's a person on his way to getting a CFA. And I should say they are certificate holders. I have to use the right terminology. But anyway, they hold the Chartered Financial Analyst designation.
Yes. Chartered members, I think, is the proper
yeah,
one.
so anyway, but obviously an impressive designation. And so they come together and they talk about not only kind of what's going on macro, but what they're seeing in clients and what issues are happening. We also have a planning committee, and I mentioned the people who were on that. And by the way, some of our investment-focused kind of next-gen advisors sit in on the planning calls.
Right? That's cool.
Right. And so it's one of those things that we don't just get together and again talk about macro and like, what is this? What does the House resolution look like? Right? What are they going to do for tax cuts? $4.5 trillion, really? We don't just talk about that, but we also say, hey, I've got a client. This is the question they've asked. What are your thoughts? And so we integrate across the firm and we integrate as a team. Every client has probably 5 team members who are dedicated to them. And we leverage internal communications really effectively as well. So everybody's aware when somebody talks to a client, everybody's aware of, right? So
that's awesome. All right. Maybe this is a quick question. Maybe it's not a quick question. So I'm just going to preface it with that.
Okay.
I think what you've built for ultra high net worth clients is impressive. And I think it's cool even that you mentioned, it was a little bit in passing, but how that was always the strategy in the beginning. Like you talked about, a lot of people kind of work their way up to that. Hey, I start with this type of client. I work this way up. Everybody would love to, I think everybody would love to work with ultra high net worth clients. So that's a long rambling meander to say, how do you find them? How do you find and get ultra high net worth people to come and say yes to you? Because I think there's tons of people who would love to work with them, but they just can't get in those circles. They can't get the meetings. They can't even get the opportunities to convince them to work with them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the question is, you've done such an incredible job of that for the firm out there listening who says, man, yeah, like I would love to kind of do what they're doing. How do you get those clients?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. The vast majority of our business is coming from introductions from existing clients and introductions from professional advisors who've seen us do the work that we do, which all boils down to say it, do it with excellence. And when someone says, this is outstanding, that's when you say, do you know anybody else who could benefit from the work that we do? And most of the time, we haven't had to even ask. They've said, you need to meet, my business partner, my CFO, my CEO. You need to meet this person because what you're talking about with me, they have this issue as well, right? And by the way, we get emails every day. Do you want more high net worth leads? Do you want more high net worth leads? I've got a way to get you more high net worth leads. And last year, I think we added on average new assets over 50 million a month in new assets last year on average across that. Now the market growth gave us a lift even above that, but that feels like we're doing the right things. And when you're doing the right things, people do tend to find you. They do tend to talk and share stories and ask each other questions. The other aspect is that a lot of what we do is just expanding within the family. You need to meet my brother. You need to meet my sister. You need to meet, right? And there's just no better endorsement, nothing more humbling, and nothing for which we're more grateful than being able to serve families the way that we do, that results in them being thrilled to the point of saying, hey, I'm going to entrust someone I care deeply about to you. That's a big deal. So I don't do that.
That's perfect. I think everybody in this industry grows by way of referral in some way, shape, or form. And I figure that in those circles, that's probably the single best way. But I didn't know if it was like, hey, you got to go get on boards. You got to go be where they're at and just kind of, take the time. And I'm sure there's some aspects of that, but really I hear you saying there's no shortcut. There's no secret. You got to find one and you got to do great work. And if you do great work for one and the world that surrounds them, people are going to talk. That's how it works, because it's really hard to build trust in those circles, I believe. And I think that's ultimately what you're saying.
Hard to build, easy to lose if you fail to do something you committed to. So the other secret is, it's not really a secret. It's relatively obvious, I guess, but put the discipline structure in place that makes sure that you do what you're going to say you do, or you do what you say you're going to do. So, you're sitting at a client meeting, again, we never have one person sitting at a client meeting. There's always more than one person. There's always somebody saying that, what are the next steps? What are we committing to? And usually our meetings are so broad in topic flow. Like you're talking about taxes, you're talking about cash flow, you're talking about investments, you're talking about credit and liability side of the balance sheet, and property and casualty insurance. Like, so we actually meet 2 days a week to go over every task that's on our list for our client base. We can do this. We have the time. What's on your plate? Are you hitting any obstacles? How's it going? Do you need anything? What's on your plate? Are you right? And so we literally go through every task. It's a little mundane, but in that way, we do our best not to drop any balls.
So good, man. I love it. It's funny because I find myself even trying to find some sort of innovative or unique or interesting way that how do you, and the reality is the more of these conversations I have, the more people I'm interacting with that I would say are having success. I know a lot of them would say, oh, I'm not successful yet or any of those types of things, but they're having success. It really is just the fundamentals. Like just do the fundamentals well. The flash is not nearly as beneficial or helpful as you think it would be. Put together a good offering, show up, execute that offering, do what you say you're going to do, and be consistent about it. And if you do that for a long enough period of time, you're going to get lucky, right? And it really is that simple sometimes.
And surround yourself with the right people. I mean, the team that we have here, I mentioned, Chris Gunster, former global head of fixed income portfolio management for Merrill Lynch, right? That with Neil Ellis, who designed and ran the tax optimized managed active and the managed active core portfolio for his prior firm. Matt Michaels, who 20 plus years serving families, at one of the highest portfolio manager who used the highest percentage of alternatives within his portfolios. Not because he pushed them, but because he thought they would fit and how they. So he's got a ton of experience in that space, that private markets and private equity space. So you've got people here who, when a client asks a question, we can answer it, and who think proactively enough in those areas, because that's a trick too. Like you can be responsive to a task request, but if you can actually create a directional change in a client that's in their best interest because you're being proactive and thoughtful, that's where you go. Nobody's ever thought of that for me, and no one's ever brought that to my attention. That's just the magic of right people, right experience, right amount of time dedicated to the family to understand them well enough, and good collaboration.
I love it, man. That's awesome. That's powerful. That's powerful. Last two questions, two segments. One question, and then we'll do our Milemarker Minute at the end. So I think one of the responsibilities of sitting in the seat that you sit in is you have to kind of try and look around corners a little bit and anticipate what's coming for your business, for, your clients, for your firm. And, we've spent a lot of this show talking about the ultra high net worth segment, the type of people you serve. So normally I would ask this question a little more broad, but I'm going to narrow the scope on this one, which is, what are some things that you see coming in the future down the pipe that will impact ultra high net worth clients in a way that you all are trying to position your business and that, other people should be thinking about in the industry?
I think AI is going to be meaningful. I think it's going to make us more efficient. It's not going to replace the people who do the work that we do across the industry generally. Way more of what we do is behavioral, more art than science, I guess, if we're doing our jobs correctly, right?
Yeah.
So, but that said, like you use an example of when we onboard a client, we review their tax returns, we review their estate documents, we review their, right? So if you can find a tool that will give you a baseline understanding of those documents without, fast, and there are tools out there that will do that, and those are advancing very swiftly. So that's going to help us do what we do, right? Which is then kind of dig into how that document or situation applies specifically to what we see coming for that client. So I think in a way that AI, if you just kind of broadly call that work of understanding some complex things broadly, whether it's an estate document or a trust document or a will or a tax return, can be very helpful. And there again, the technology is playing a big part in that. So to the extent that helps us do our jobs better, I welcome it and can't wait for it to get better, because it isn't perfect today. So I see that as a shift. There's one thing that's kind of more moment in time-ish, but, we've got a lot of people that have gotten used to returns in the market that are loftier than they should expect going forward.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so there's kind of this behavioral moderation thing. So I think there's going to be an interesting time that we're all going to deal with it when that ultimate kind of unknown hits. And I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know when it's going to be. I don't think our investment committee purports to know what it is or when it's going to be. but there'll be an interesting behavioral milestone to overcome there with clients. And I don't know when it's going to happen. So there's that piece. The other thing we're keeping our eye on, as I'm sure everybody in this industry is we are facing a massive deficit problem, and we are facing a desire to cut taxes, and those two things don't go in hand. So we are also trying to keep an eye on, what is being proposed with the tax bills. And we're aware that you're never going to get something permanent passed at this point because of the narrow margins, but what's it going to look like and for how long? And then how swiftly can you react to that or prepare for it in advance and then react when it actually happens? So we are keeping a very close eye on kind of the proposals that are being put out there. And I mentioned it earlier, the House resolution that came out just recently in terms of, hey, Department of Energy, you have to cut this much, and you have to cut this much. And so the decisions that ultimately get made in the tax space have a huge impact on our client base. So we do have to keep our eyes on where that's heading and think about not what we're going to do today, but what we would do if.
Yeah.
Right. To the extent, again, we have enough of a detailed understanding of our client's situation, we hope that we do a good job of that.
I love it. Great answer. Rick, you're really good at giving nuanced responses to some of the stuff that I ask. I think, it's never a bad thing, but a lot of times I think I get pretty macro answers to the questions I ask. But I love some of the nuance answers that you provide to things. I think they're very insightful.
Oh, I appreciate your saying that. I mentioned it earlier, but there's nothing that replaces sitting with clients and talking through issues, hosting family meetings and having all these questions come up and then figuring out how to explain them in a way. I mean, that's what our investment team is so good at. They just make the complex simple. It's or understandable, I should say. So we try. I appreciate it.
All right, let's move into the final segment of the show. This is called the Milemarker Minute. This is an opportunity to ask you some lightning round questions. The goal is to try and have them all answered within 60 seconds, but I'm not going to hold you to that. And it's going to be about learning about you outside of the business. So are you ready for that?
I will do my best.
Okay. If you could travel anywhere in the world that you've never traveled to before, where would you go?
I've always wanted to go to Australia, so we'll throw Australia out there. We've never been.
I love it. Are you a mountains person or a beach person?
So yes, our family, when we take time away, we do the mountains in the summer. We go to Vail, and we have a couple of little places on the beach up on Amelia Island. So a little bit of both. I live in Tampa, so the beach is easier, but we do love both. So I wish I could be more specific, but yes is the answer. I like both.
Okay. Should all advisors be running family meetings with their clients, irregardless of the asset level? Or do you think there's an asset level where it starts to make sense to host family meetings?
There's no question that family meetings are necessary with multi-generational wealth. The reason plans fail isn't because they weren't executed well. It's because they weren't maintained and optimized, and people were not prepared to play the role that they're going to play when they step into the shoes of the wealth creators or the generation before them. As to whether a family meeting is necessary at levels that don't rise to multi-generational wealth, and you can define that in a lot of different ways, right? If there's any assets passing, that could be multi-generational wealth. So that covers a lot of people, by the way. Here's how I'll try to answer it in less than 60 seconds. Serving the whole family is wiser than not serving the whole family. And whether that includes family meetings or not can be dictated by the circumstance. But if mom and dad are thinking about what they want to do for the kids, either during life or after, or what they want to do and then what they can leave for their kids, then involving the kids in those conversations and or meeting with the kids to help them understand what they need to be thinking about. And I just think it's critical. And I will tell you that is, I was in a client's home this week earlier out of town, and they said one of the biggest reasons they love is because we helped all of their kids get their estate documents in place.
That's great.
Not because those kids had huge complexity, but they didn't have wills. They didn't have revocable trust. They didn't have powers of attorney. They didn't, right? And they were all married with kids. And so they're just, that little thing it's super valuable. And think of the peace of mind that they have that our kids are cared for.
Yeah.
So may not be a family meeting, but it's caring for the family that's important. And in many cases, caring for the family involves a family meeting.
You know what? I went off script a little bit with that lightning round question, and I'm glad that you answered it the way that you did. And it wasn't just like a punchy thing, because I still think there was a lot of value in that. So I appreciate that.
It was more than 60 seconds, maybe.
That's okay. Like I said, I'm not going to hold you to it. If the value's there, we're going to keep it. Okay, back to the lightning round question. What is the best book that you have read or listened to in the past year?
I spent a lot of time reading, but most of my reading is client estate documents and tax. So I tend not to read a lot. I read a lot of news articles, updates, and I listen to a podcast on casualty loss deductions to make sure I understand all the new rules. But I am insanely focused, probably to a fault, on making sure I'm ready to answer questions and help clients. And so I don't do a lot of outside reading.
Okay. That's still a good answer, though. For all the clients listening to this, Rick's got your back. That's for sure.
Rick and the team. I am just but one member. So
I know you were an Ohio State Buckeye fan. And, as we're recording this, they just recently won the national championship, but they also have
I remember that.
Yeah. But they also had the heartbreaking loss to Michigan. So for you, is this still a successful season because they won the national championship but lost to Michigan, or is it going to feel tainted?
It will never be tainted for me. I actually feel like we owe Michigan a debt of gratitude. They lit a fire in the Buckeyes that it was obviously pretty hard to put out. It was an unbelievable playoff run. I think about the playoffs just generally and significantly different than prior years. It's interesting. Ohio State won the first 14 college football playoff, and Ohio State won the first playoff. So feeling proud of that. I am incredibly proud of what they accomplished and incredibly proud of the fact that they overcame the challenge of a heartbreaking loss to the team up north.
I love it. All right. And then last question for you. There's an alternate universe that exists. Rick is also in that alternate universe, but he is not a financial planner or an accountant. What is the career that you have in this alternate universe?
I have really never thought what else I would do. I feel incredibly blessed and grateful to be able to serve the families that we serve. I'm not sure there's much else out there that I would choose. Honestly, I don't mean that glibly or without thought. I just think about the clients that we're working with, incredibly successful, incredibly high net worth, and we are still educating them on things that matter to them and making a difference in their lives. That means the world to us.
Great way to end, man. So let's go ahead and wrap it up there. I really appreciate you coming on the show, dropping all kinds of insights and knowledge, not just about working with the ultra high net worth segment, but also on how you mentor people to serve them and how you just dive deep into caring for that segment of the market. And kudos to the great firm that you've built. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure sharing our story and the strength of the team that we've built. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome, man. All right, everybody, that's been another episode of The Connected Advisor. If you are listening to this or watching it somewhere, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit follow or subscribe. And then if you'd also be kind enough to leave us a review so that people who've never heard of this can hear great conversations like the one we just had with Rick and whichever future conversations we're going to have. But until the next episode, enjoy every mile.